My brother once told our entire family I'd never amount to anything, but he never expected I'd end up owning his dream car, with him as my personal driver. If you've ever wanted to witness the perfect revenge against someone who underestimated you, hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories of sweet justice. Growing up with my brother Ethan was like living in the shadow of a mountain. 2 years older, infinitely more confident, and somehow always the center of attention at every family gathering. Our parents never explicitly favored him, but they didn't have to. Ethan made sure everyone knew he was the golden child. "Bridget's just taking her time finding herself," he'd announce at Thanksgiving dinner, patting my shoulder with false sympathy while I sat there with my half-finished community college degree and my part-time job at a bookstore that barely covered my rent. Not everyone can be focused like me. Focused was one way to put it. Ruthless was another. Ethan had always known what he wanted: status, success, and that ridiculous Aston Martin he'd been obsessed with since he was 16. He had the poster on his wall all through high school and college. He even had a scale model of it on his desk at the investment firm where he landed his first job out of business school. "It's not just a car," he'd explain to anyone who would listen. "It's a statement. When you drive an Aston Martin, you're telling the world you've made it." I'd roll my eyes every time he went on about that car, but deep down, I wished I had something, anything, I was that passionate about. The day everything changed started like any other Sunday family dinner at our parents' house in Connecticut. The sprawling colonial where we grew up always felt smaller when Ethan was home, his presence somehow taking up more space than physically possible. "So, little sis, still working at that bookstore?" Ethan asked as he passed me the mashed potatoes. He was wearing one of his custom-tailored suits, even for a casual family dinner. Classic Ethan. "Actually, I started, but he was already talking over me. You know, I could probably get you an interview for an admin position at my firm. Nothing fancy, but at least it's a real job with benefits." Our mother winced slightly. "Ethan, your sister has a real job." "Mom, selling paperbacks to college kids isn't a career?" He turned to our father. "Dad, back me up here. Bridget's 32. Shouldn't she be a little further along by now?" Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Everyone moves at their own pace, son." "That's the problem," Ethan said, cutting into his roast beef with surgical precision. "Bridget doesn't move at all. She's been stuck in neutral her entire life." I stared at my plate, feeling the familiar burn of shame creep up my neck. The worst part wasn't Ethan's words. I'd heard variations of them for years. The worst part was that deep down, I feared he was right. "Actually," I said, forcing myself to look up, "I've been meaning to tell you all something." 3 pairs of eyes turned to me. My mother's hopeful, my father's curious, and Ethan's skeptical. "I quit the bookstore last month." Ethan snorted. "Let me guess. You're going to find yourself backpacking through Europe?" "No," I said quietly. "I started my own business." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then Ethan burst out laughing. "A business? You? Doing what exactly?" I took a deep breath. "I've developed an algorithm that helps independent bookstores optimize their inventory based on regional reading trends and local demographics." More silence. "It's a software company," I clarified. "I've been coding since I was in college, remember? That computer science degree I never finished? Well, I kept learning on my own." Ethan's smile was patronizing. "Bridget, starting a business requires capital, connections, business acumen, things you don't have." "I got a small business loan," I said. "And I've already signed 3 bookstores as clients." 3 whole bookstores. Ethan whistled. "Well, I guess that'll cover your ramen noodle budget." Mom reached over and squeezed my hand. "That sounds wonderful, honey. We're proud of you for taking initiative." But I could see the doubt in her eyes. The same doubt that had been reflected back at me from my own mirror every morning for years. The same doubt that Ethan had planted and carefully tended like a garden. "Thanks, Mom," I said, forcing a smile. "It's small now, but I have a business plan. In 5 years, I'm projecting—" "Bridge, come on," Ethan interrupted, using the nickname he knew I hated. "We've heard you talk about plans before. Remember that food blog you were going to start? Or the online vintage clothing store? Or that children's book you were writing? Each abandoned project felt like a dagger. The worst part was, he wasn't wrong. I had a history of starting things and not following through. But this was different. This time I had something to prove, not just to Ethan, but to myself. "This is different," I said firmly. "Sure it is," Ethan replied, his tone making it clear he didn't believe me for a second. He turned to our parents. "Did I tell you about the promotion I got last week? I'm now the youngest senior investment manager in the firm's history." And just like that, the conversation shifted back to Ethan's achievements, his plans, his future. I became invisible again, picking at my food while my brother held court. After dinner, I helped Mom with the dishes while Dad and Ethan retreated to the den to talk stocks or sports or whatever it was they discussed when it was just the guys. "Don't mind your brother," Mom said, handing me a plate to dry. "He means well." "Does he?" I asked, stacking the plate with more force than necessary. "He's always been competitive, but he loves you." I wasn't so sure about that. Love didn't feel like constantly being torn down, having your dreams dismissed before they could even take flight. Later, as I was leaving, Ethan caught me at the door. For a moment, I thought he might apologize for dinner. Instead, he pressed a business card into my hand. "My friend David works in HR at a tech company. Entry-level stuff, but they have good benefits. You know, just in case this business of yours doesn't work out." I stared at the card, something snapping inside me. "You know what, Ethan? Keep it. I won't need it." He shrugged. "Your call. But when this little project inevitably crashes and burns like all your others, don't say I didn't try to help." I walked to my car, a 10-year-old Honda Civic with fading paint and over 150,000 miles on the odometer, feeling a strange calm settle over me. Ethan's newest Mercedes gleamed in the driveway, just one step below his dream Aston Martin. As I pulled away, I made myself a promise. This wouldn't be like all the other times. This business would succeed, not because I had something to prove to Ethan, but because for once in my life, I truly believed in what I was doing. What I didn't know then was that the algorithm I'd created wasn't just good, it was revolutionary, and it was about to change everything. I wish I could say my business took off immediately after that dinner, but real life doesn't work that way. For the next 8 months, I worked harder than I ever had before. My tiny apartment became my office, my dining table covered in notes, my laptop running constantly. I slept maybe 4 hours a night, fueled by cheap coffee and sheer determination. My first 3 bookstore clients were impressed enough with the initial results to refer me to others. Word spread slowly at first, then faster. By month 4, I had 10 clients. By month 6, 25. The algorithm worked. Stores were reporting inventory cost reductions of 15% and sales increases of nearly 20%. I hired my first employee, then my second. I moved operations from my apartment to a small office space. I improved the algorithm, making it more sophisticated, more accurate. I started building a complementary customer data platform that bookstores could use to create personalized reading recommendations. I was so busy I barely had time to visit my parents, which meant I also didn't have to see Ethan. He'd sent a few texts over those months, mostly along the lines of, "How's the business going?" with quotation marks I could practically hear in his voice. I kept my responses vague. Let him wonder. Then came the call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was working through lunch as usual when my phone rang with an unknown number. "Is this Bridget Harlow of Booksmart Analytics?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, this is she," I replied, trying to sound more professional than I felt in my day-old t-shirt and messy bun. "This is Melissa Chen from Tech Forward Ventures. Your company has been brought to our attention, and we'd like to discuss potential investment opportunities." I nearly choked on my cold coffee. Tech Forward was one of the most prestigious venture capital firms in the country. They didn't waste time on small fry like me. "I'm sorry. How did you hear about us?" I asked, certain this was some kind of mistake. "One of our partners used your platform at his wife's bookstore in Seattle. He was impressed enough to bring it to our attention. We've done some preliminary research on your growth metrics, and we'd like to learn more. 2 days later, I was sitting in a sleek conference room in downtown Boston, pitching my company to 5 partners at Tech Forward. I'd spent every waking moment preparing, bought my first real business suit, and practiced my presentation until I could recite it in my sleep. "What separates your algorithm from others on the market?" one of the partners asked. "Most inventory management systems for bookstores are based on general retail principles," I explained, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "They don't account for the unique aspects of book-buying behavior. My algorithm incorporates regional reading trends, local demographic data, and even factors like weather patterns and seasonal shifts in reading preferences." Another partner leaned forward. "And you developed this entirely on your own?" "Yes," I said simply. "I saw a problem and created a solution." By the end of the meeting, they were offering me $2.5 million in Series A funding for a 15% stake in Booksmart Analytics. The valuation put my company at nearly $17 million, a number so large I had trouble processing it. "We believe your technology has applications beyond just bookstores," Melissa explained. "With some development, this could revolutionize inventory management across the retail sector." I signed the papers the following week. Suddenly, I had capital, resources, a board of advisors, and a whole new level of pressure. But for the first time in my life, I felt equal to the challenge. The first thing I did was hire a proper team: developers, marketing specialists, account managers. We moved to a real office in Cambridge. I started paying myself an actual salary instead of the bare minimum I'd been scraping by on. The second thing I did was buy a car. Not just any car, an Aston Martin DB11, the exact model Ethan had coveted since high school. It cost more than I'd ever imagined spending on anything, but as I signed the paperwork at the dealership, I felt a satisfaction that went beyond petty revenge. This wasn't just about showing up Ethan. It was about finally recognizing my own worth. The car was delivered on a Friday, its sleek silver body gleaming in the afternoon sun. I ran my hand over the smooth curves, hardly believing it was mine. I'd never been a car person, but even I could appreciate the artistry of its design, the purr of the engine when I turned the key. I drove it straight to my parents' house for our monthly family dinner, timing my arrival for when I knew Ethan would already be there. As I pulled into the driveway, the look on his face through the front window was worth every penny. He was outside before I'd even turned off the engine, his expression a mixture of shock, confusion, and, most satisfyingly, envy. "What the hell is this?" he demanded as I stepped out of the car. "Did you rent this to impress everyone?" I smiled, twirling the keys around my finger. "Nope, it's mine. Bought and paid for." "That's impossible," he sputtered. "This car costs—" "I know exactly how much it costs, Ethan. I wrote the check." Our parents had joined us in the driveway by now, both looking equally stunned. "Bridget, honey," Mom began cautiously, "this is quite a statement. Are you sure this was a wise purchase?" "It's fine, Mom," I assured her. "The business is doing well." "Doing well?" Ethan scoffed. "You'd have to be doing a lot better than well to afford this." I met his gaze steadily. Tech Forward Ventures seems to think so. They invested $2.5 million last month. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. My father recovered first, pulling me into a tight hug. "That's incredible, sweetheart. Why didn't you tell us?" "I wanted to surprise you," I said, though we both knew that wasn't the whole truth. Dinner that night was a reversal of every family meal I could remember. For once, I was the center of attention, fielding questions about the business, the investment, my plans for expansion. Ethan sat mostly silent, pushing food around his plate. As the evening wound down, I found myself alone with him in the kitchen as I helped clear the dishes. "Congratulations," he said finally, the word sounding like it had been forcibly extracted. "I guess I underestimated you." "You always have," I replied, keeping my tone light. He frowned. "So what? You bought this car just to rub it in my face? Pretty childish, don't you think?" "Maybe," I admitted. "Or maybe I just liked it." Nobody spends that kind of money on a car they just like, Bridget. We both know why you bought it. I shrugged, loading the dishwasher. Think what you want. As I was preparing to leave, Ethan followed me out to the driveway, eyeing the Aston Martin with poorly disguised longing. Can I at least see what it's like inside? He asked, attempting nonchalance. I hesitated, then tossed him the keys. Take it for a spin. His eyes widened. Seriously? Just around the block, I said. And Ethan? Try not to wrap it around a tree. I'm not sure your ego could handle being responsible for damaging my car. He slid into the driver's seat like he was easing into a warm bath, his hands caressing the leather steering wheel with something close to reverence. I watched from the porch as he drove away, the engine's purr fading into the distance. When he returned 15 minutes later, having taken a much longer route than around the block, his face was flushed with excitement. That was, he began, then seemed to remember himself. It's nice. Just nice? I asked, raising an eyebrow. A reluctant smile tugged at his lips. It's everything I thought it would be. As I took back the keys, a crazy idea began to form in my mind. An idea that would either heal the rift between us or drive the wedge deeper. How's work going? I asked casually. His smile faded. Fine. Why? Just curious. Still at the same firm? Of course, he said defensively. Why wouldn't I be? But something in his tone caught my attention. A slight hesitation, a hint of discomfort. No reason, I said, getting into the car. See you next month. As I drove away, I pulled out my phone and called Melissa from Tech Forward. Melissa? It's Bridget. I need you to find out something for me about Ethan Harlow at Westridge Investments. Sometimes the universe hands you an opportunity for perfect justice, and sometimes you have to create that opportunity yourself. It took Melissa less than 24 hours to get back to me with information about Ethan. My brother, the golden child, the financial wunderkind, had been quietly fired from Westridge Investments 3 weeks earlier. The official reason was strategic restructuring. But Melissa's contacts suggested it had more to do with a high-risk investment strategy that had cost several major clients significant money. Ethan hadn't told anyone, not our parents, not his friends, and certainly not me. According to Melissa, he'd been making the rounds at other investment firms, but his reputation had taken a hit. No one was rushing to hire him. I sat with this information for several days, turning it over in my mind. Part of me, the part that remembered every dismissive comment, every eye roll, every time he'd made me feel small, wanted to confront him, to enjoy watching him squirm. But another part, perhaps the better part, recognized something familiar in his situation. The fear of failure, the shame, the desperate need to maintain appearances. Booksmart was growing faster than I could manage alone. We were expanding into new markets, developing additional products. I needed someone who understood finance, who could help navigate the complicated waters of venture capital and potential acquisitions. Someone hungry to prove themselves. I needed a chief financial officer. You want to hire your brother? Melissa asked when I broached the subject during our weekly call. The same brother you've described as, and I quote, an arrogant, undermining jerk who wouldn't recognize a good idea if it slapped him in the face. He's also a Harvard Business School graduate with 10 years of experience in financial management, I pointed out. And he's currently available. Available because he crashed and burned at his last position, Melissa reminded me. Bridget, I understand the impulse to help family, but this is business. Your business, which is now partially our business. We didn't invest in Booksmart so you could run it like a charity. It's not charity, I insisted. It's strategy. Ethan knows the financial world inside and out. He has connections we need. And yes, he made a mistake at Westridge. But that means he'll be working twice as hard to redeem himself. Melissa sighed. And the fact that you'd be his boss, after a lifetime of him looking down on you, has nothing to do with this decision? I paused. I'd be lying if I said I hadn't considered the symmetry. At least you're honest, she said. Look, it's your company. If you want to bring him on, we won't block it. But we'll be watching closely. The first sign that this personal dynamic is affecting business decisions, we step in. Understood? Perfectly, I assured her. The next step was actually offering Ethan the job, which meant first letting him know that I knew about his employment situation. I decided to be direct, inviting him to lunch at an upscale restaurant in Boston. He arrived 15 minutes late, dressed impeccably as always, though I noticed his watch, usually a Rolex, had been replaced with something less ostentatious. "Nice place," he commented, sliding into the booth across from me. "Business must be booming." "It is," I said. "How about you? How's Westridge?" His smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Fine. Busy as always." I took a sip of water, holding his gaze. "That's interesting, since you were let go almost a month ago." The color drained from his face. "How did you—" "I have resources now, Ethan. I know about the failed investment strategy, the clients who pulled out. I know you've been interviewing at other firms without much luck." He stared at his menu, jaw clenched. "Well, congratulations. You've finally got something to hold over me. I assume that's why you invited me here? To gloat? Actually, I invited you here to offer you a job." His head snapped up. "What?" "Booksmart needs a CFO. Someone who understands high-level financial strategy, who can help us manage our growth and prepare for eventual expansion or acquisition. And you're offering this to me? Why?" I considered my answer carefully. "Because despite everything, you're good at what you do. One mistake doesn't erase a decade of success. And because I think we might actually make a good team if we could both get over ourselves enough to try." Ethan leaned back, studying me with new eyes. "What's the catch? I'd be working for my little sister?" "That's not a catch. That's reality," I said firmly. "I built this company. I'm the CEO. If you come on board, you report to me." "And what about your investors? They're okay with you hiring your recently fired brother?" "They've approved the decision, with certain conditions." He laughed, but it wasn't unkind. "I bet they have." He ran a hand through his hair, thinking. "What's the compensation package?" I slid a folder across the table. "Everything's outlined there. Salary, equity options, benefits. It's competitive." He opened the folder, his eyebrows rising as he scanned the numbers. "Very competitive." "We're not a small operation anymore," I said. "We're projected to hit $30 million in revenue this year." He closed the folder, something like respect flickering in his eyes. "When you do something, you don't mess around, do you?" "Not anymore," I agreed. "I'll need to think about it." "Of course. Take the weekend. But Ethan, don't take too long. If it's not you, it'll be someone else. This train is moving with or without you." As I drove home in my Aston Martin that afternoon, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me hoped he'd say yes, not just for the business, but because maybe, just maybe, we could repair something that had been broken for a very long time. Another part feared what would happen if we tried to work together, if old patterns reasserted themselves. On Monday morning, my assistant put a call through to my office. "So," Ethan said without preamble, "if I take this job, does it come with a company car?" I smiled into the phone. "Funny you should ask about that." Ethan's first day as Booksmart's CFO began with him driving me to work. Not because he had to, but because I'd insisted on him taking the Aston Martin for a proper drive. The look on his face when I'd handed him the keys had been priceless, a mixture of childlike excitement and adult suspicion. "This isn't a permanent arrangement," I clarified as he adjusted the mirrors. "Just a welcome gesture." "Right," he said, caressing the steering wheel. "Still, it's a nice gesture." As we drove through the morning traffic toward Cambridge, I filled him in on the current state of the company, our growth projections, the new products in development, the team he'd be working with. "The pressure's going to be intense," I warned. "Tech Forward wants to see results fast. They're already talking about a Series B round next year." Ethan nodded, taking it all in. Fast growth means fast decisions. You need to be careful not to overextend. "That's why I hired you," I reminded him. "To help make those decisions." When we arrived at the office, I could see him assessing everything. The modern space, the bustle of activity, the energy of a successful startup. For the first time, I saw my company through his eyes, and I felt a surge of pride. "Not bad, sis," he murmured as I showed him to his office, smaller than mine but with a decent view of the river. "It'll do for now," I said. "Prove yourself, and maybe we'll talk about an upgrade." He grinned, setting down his briefcase. Challenge accepted. The first few weeks were a period of adjustment for everyone. My team had to get used to Ethan's more formal approach to business, his insistence on detailed financial reports, his probing questions about efficiency and scalability. Ethan had to adapt to a startup environment where things moved quickly and sometimes messily, where perfect information wasn't always available before decisions had to be made. And I had to learn how to be Ethan's boss, which meant finding the delicate balance between professional authority and our complicated personal history. There were missteps. Ethan initially tried to bypass me on several decisions, going directly to the board with concerns about our expansion plans. I called him into my office after the third such incident. "This stops now," I said, closing the door behind him. "If you have issues with our strategy, you bring them to me first. That's how this works." "I'm trying to protect the company," he argued. "These new markets you want to enter, the risk profile is higher than you're acknowledging." "I'm aware of the risks. I've run the numbers too." "Then you know we should be moving more cautiously." I leaned against my desk. "What I know is that fortune favors the bold. We have a window of opportunity here, Ethan. If we don't move now, someone else will." He crossed his arms. "This isn't like you. The Bridget I knew was cautious to a fault." "Maybe you never really knew me," I suggested. "Or maybe I've changed. Either way, this is my company, and this is the direction we're going. You can help shape the journey, but you don't get to change the destination. Are we clear?" He held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "Crystal." Despite these tensions, we found a rhythm. Ethan's financial acumen was undeniable, and once he accepted that I had the final say, he became an invaluable advisor. He restructured our financial reporting, negotiated better terms with our vendors, and developed a more sophisticated approach to our pricing strategy. And somewhere along the way, something shifted between us. The old dynamics didn't disappear entirely. Some patterns are too deeply ingrained to vanish overnight, but they evolved. There was a new respect underlying our interactions, a growing recognition that we each had strengths the other lacked. 3 months after Ethan joined Booksmart, we closed our largest deal yet, a partnership with a major publishing house to integrate our algorithm into their distribution system. The contract would double our annual revenue overnight. We celebrated with the team at a rooftop bar overlooking the city, the summer night warm and clear, the future stretching out before us like the twinkling lights of Boston. As the party wound down, Ethan found me at a quiet corner of the rooftop. "Nice work today," he said, clinking his glass against mine. "You closed that deal like a pro." "I had a good teacher," I admitted. "All those times I watched you negotiate with Mom and Dad about curfew." He laughed. "I was pretty persuasive, wasn't I?" "Insufferably so." We fell into a comfortable silence, watching the city below. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally. "Why did you really hire me? You could have had your revenge, watched me struggle. God knows I deserved it after the way I treated you." I considered the question, watching the ice melt in my glass. "Do you remember that science project in 6th grade? The one with the volcano?" "Vaguely." "Didn't yours fail spectacularly?" "It did. The baking soda mixture was too thin, and instead of a neat eruption, it just sort of oozed all over the gym floor." Everyone laughed. "I still don't see—" "You were the only one who helped me clean it up. Everyone else, including the teacher, just walked away. But you stayed. You didn't say anything. You just grabbed some paper towels and started wiping up the mess." He looked surprised. "I don't even remember that." "I do," I said simply. "That's the brother I hired. Not the one who put me down at family dinners or dismissed my dreams. The one who, when it really mattered, showed up." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "I haven't been that brother very often, have I?" "No," I agreed. "But maybe it's not too late to start." The following Sunday, we drove together to our parents' house for dinner. This time, I was behind the wheel of the Aston Martin, with Ethan in the passenger seat. "You know," he said as we pulled into the familiar driveway, "I used to think this car represented success. That once I had it, I'd know I'd made it. And now?" He smiled, a genuine smile without the edge of competition that had defined our relationship for so long. "Now I think success is finding something you love doing, and someone who believes in you enough to give you a second chance when you screw up." As we walked to the front door, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. The weight of trying to prove myself, of needing Ethan's approval, of measuring my worth against his yardstick. "By the way," I said, pausing on the porch, "starting Monday, you get your own company car." His eyes widened. "The Aston?" "God, no," I laughed. "A sensible BMW. The Aston's mine." "Fair enough," he conceded. "I'm just the CFO, after all. The boss gets the better car." "Exactly," I agreed. "And don't you forget it." As we entered the house, greeted by the familiar sounds and smells of home, I realized something important. The greatest revenge wasn't buying Ethan's dream car or becoming his boss. It was finding the confidence to forge my own path, to believe in myself even when no one else did. Not even him. And the greatest victory wasn't proving him wrong. It was giving us both the chance to become better versions of ourselves, together.